Welcome everyone to History at Bedtime. Tonight, we're going to step quietly into a world long past, where the air carried both the scent of freshly baked bread and whispers of a shadow that changed life forever. A world where villages and cities had to learn to breathe again after the unimaginable, where streets, once filled with chatter, now held silence, and those who survived found their lives and their futures rewritten. A gentle warning: this story may make the past feel startlingly vivid. You probably won't make it through this day without feeling a little lost in another time. And that's exactly the point. Let yourself drift. Let curiosity soften the edges of the present. Before we go further, leave a comment with your location and local time. It's a small, quiet way to connect our imaginations across the world. And if you enjoy letting history unfold slowly, soothingly, and curiously, please like this video and subscribe. Here, there's no rush, only stories waiting to carry you gently through time. Take a deep, calming breath. Let your shoulders relax. Let the day slip softly away. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. Tonight, we find ourselves wandering through the villages and cities of medieval Europe. In the uneasy years after the Black Death, the survivors move cautiously, rebuilding homes, tending their fields, and learning that life, once again, is both fragile and surprisingly persistent. Let's jump into the unseen medieval struggle. What life was like for survivors after the Black Death. It all starts as the wind picks up ever so slightly as you step outside. The cold morning air brushing against your face. You can hear it. The same quiet hum of a world that once teemed with voices, now eerily still. A slight fog curls around the edges of the streets, curling between buildings, as if the land itself is still holding its breath. The world after the Black Death, you see, doesn't sound like the one you know. There's no chatter in the town square, no raucous laughter from the tavern, no distant call of merchants selling their wares. All that's left is silence, and it's the kind of silence that clings to you like a heavy cloak that never quite sheds itself. You walk slowly through the streets of this town that, in some ways, you no longer recognize. Once bustling with life, it now feels like a hollow shell. Buildings left abandoned, some half destroyed, others still standing but unused. You pass by a market stall, its wooden frame sagging, its wares gathered in piles of rot and dust. The ground, too, feels unfamiliar beneath your feet, every step reminding you of the loss, the absence that has taken hold. The plague came, and it left something more than just dead bodies behind. It left survivors to navigate the chaos of a world that had once been theirs, but was now irrevocably altered. You glance over at a family sitting on the stoop of a nearby house. The father gazing out into the street, his face drawn with exhaustion, a slight bitterness in his eyes. His children play quietly nearby, as if they've learned to stay within the limits of their own world. You can almost hear their thoughts too. Did we survive for this? Historians still debate whether the immediate aftermath of the plague was worse than the pestilence itself. Some argue that the death toll, estimated at a third of Europe's population, was too great for anyone to truly grasp. Others suggest that it was the psychological and social after effects that ultimately left the deepest scars. You can't help but wonder, as you stand there watching the family, whether those scars are ever really healed. But let's not dwell on too much sorrow just yet. You probably won't make it through this day without a nap anyway. So go ahead, get comfortable, Maybe stretch your legs. This journey will take time. The good news is you're not walking it alone. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. The sun is still low in the sky, a gentle golden light spilling over rooftops and through cracked windows. You begin walking again, this time passing a small church. Its stone walls have aged, worn down by the same centuries of hardship that have worn down the people around you. You pause, glancing up at the bell tower, where the bells used to ring out every hour, every day. Now silence. The sound of the bell is gone, replaced by a haunting quiet that weighs heavily on the air. This church, like so many others, has seen the worst of times, but now it is almost unrecognizable. The stained glass windows, once vibrant with stories of saints and angels, are cracked, their colors dulled by neglect. The pews, once filled with the devout, are empty, save for a handful of survivors who have turned to religion for solace. Though, honestly, it seems more like a habit now. You know, in the early days of the Black Death, the church would have been a source of great comfort, a place of refuge for the masses. But now, well, now it stands as a reminder of everything that was lost. Some survivors turned away from the faith, questioning how their God could allow such devastation. Others clung to it even more desperately, hoping for a miracle that would never come. You've heard stories of people wandering the streets, their prayers a mere whisper to the wind. Did they still believe, or had their faith simply been replaced with routine? You continue walking, the sound of your feet on the cobblestone, the only thing you can hear. Every so often, you pass an empty home, its door ajar, revealing a dark interior. Maybe someone died there, maybe they left. There's no way to tell. But the homes that remain are telling too. They are much emptier than before, their occupants gone. Even those who are still alive have grown quieter, lost in a world where survival is more of a task than a triumph. Historians still debate how quickly society's structure collapsed after the Black Death. Some suggest that it was only temporary. Communities rebuilt, governments reorganized. Others claim that the scars of that devastation were so deep that the wounds of Europe didn't truly heal for centuries. Some days, you wonder which side of history you're walking on now. At this point, you pause by a window and glance inside. You notice a woman sitting at a table, staring at a half-filled bowl. She hasn't touched the food. Maybe she's lost the appetite for it. Or maybe she's simply too weary to care. A thin layer of dust coats the bowl, and her eyes look far away, lost in thought. You know the feeling. There's a certain exhaustion that only survivors truly understand. The kind that lingers, the kind that doesn't wash off with a good night's sleep. You feel the weight of it, too, but there's something oddly comforting about it, isn't there? The sense that, while the world may have turned upside down, at least it's still here, somehow, still standing. So, with a deep breath, you turn your back to the window and keep walking toward whatever awaits you on this strange path of survival. The lonely feast. The wind feels a little colder now, biting at your skin as you walk further down the street. The sun, still low, casts long shadows over everything, making the world feel stretched, like it's been pulled thin and left to dry in the morning light. The scent of old bread lingers in the air, faint like a forgotten memory. You pass by a bakery that's still open, its oven warm and the air inside thick with the smell of freshly baked loaves. It's an odd thing, really, this connection between food and survival. How something so simple can feel so sacred when everything else around you has crumbled. Inside the bakery, there's a woman standing behind the counter, her hands covered in flour. She's the last one left. She's been baking bread since before the plague, and she'll be baking bread long after the plague too. If she has anything to say about it, you can't help but wonder, what must it be like to stand in that small warm space, surrounded by the hum of ovens and the comforting smell of bread, while the world outside falls apart? You know, food wasn't just a means of survival back then. It was a reminder of what life used to be like before the plague. People gathered for meals, shared food with friends and family, laughed over shared platters. Now, the idea of a feast feels like something out of an old story, a distant memory of a world where people had the luxury of celebrating, of eating together in a way that didn't feel like a chore. People had to learn to be creative with what little they had left, and sometimes that meant meals made of whatever scraps you could find. No waste, just survival. Historians still debate how food culture changed after the Black Death. Some argue that food became even more significant after the plague, a kind of symbolic victory over the death that surrounded them. Others believe it lost its meaning entirely. What use was a feast when the world seemed to have forgotten how to celebrate? It's an uncomfortable thought, isn't it? How something so simple can be made so hollow. You walk on, the feeling of hunger gnawing in your stomach, but you can't bring yourself to care too much about it. Not right now. There are more important things to think about, like that strange lull in the air, the stillness that seems to cling to every building, every window you pass. Even the birds seem quieter now. You stop for a moment, listening, and realize that it's not just the silence that's unnerving, it's the absence of birdsong, the eerie quiet that fills the air. Remember that bakery you passed by earlier. The smell of bread, it's still there, faintly, a gentle reminder that life continues, even when it doesn't seem like it will. The woman's voice calls out to you, but you're too lost in your own thoughts to hear it. The strange economy of survival. As you continue down the street, the town seems to grow quieter, even more desolate. The houses around you are run down, their doors and windows either locked or abandoned. It's as if no one wants to be outside. No one wants to face the world anymore. It's easy to understand why. Really, life, as it once was, has evaporated. The once thriving market square is now a collection of empty stalls, some still standing, some leaning to one side, as though the world itself can't be bothered to care. What's the point of selling anything if there's no one left to buy? The economy has changed, and it's almost as if the world has reverted to something primal. Barter is back. You hear whispers of people trading whatever they can for food, for supplies, anything to keep going. A goat for some grain, a loaf of bread for a woolen blanket. A poor system, really, but it's all anyone can manage. You can't help but wonder how long this new economy will last. Historians still debate whether the Black Death created a long-term shift in the structure of medieval economies, or if it was a temporary blip. Some argue that it laid the foundation for the rise of a more modern economy, one where the value of labor became much more important. Others believe that people were simply too focused on survival to think about long-term economic strategies. Either way, this small town, like countless others, has been thrust into an uncertain new reality. You stop for a moment, listening to the faint sound of someone hammering away at a piece of wood in the distance. Maybe it's a blacksmith, still trying to make a living. Maybe it's someone just trying to keep themselves busy. Either way, it's a reminder that, in this new world, Work has become both a necessity and a distraction. You walk on, noticing the change in the air as you move away from the town center. The streets are narrower here, and the houses more clustered together. You feel the weight of something unspoken between the walls. This neighborhood has endured something. You can feel it in the way the houses lean toward each other, like they're sharing the same weight of grief and survival. A strange thought crosses your mind. Are the survivors of the Black Death cursed with the knowledge of their own fragility? It's a grim question, and it lingers in your mind as you continue walking through the narrow streets. No one answers, they never do. The price of survival. The cobblestones beneath your feet grow uneven, their edges smoothed by years of use, and your footsteps echo strangely as you move deeper into the heart of the town. The air is thick now, not with the typical bustle of daily life, but with a weight, the kind that presses down on your chest, making each breath feel slightly more difficult. It's a heaviness you hadn't noticed before, one that comes from the absence of people, from the silence of a world that's been hollowed out. You turn a corner and come across a small garden, its gate hanging ajar, rusted hinges creaking in the breeze. The garden, once a place of vibrant life, is now overgrown. Wild plants creeping over the stone walls and tangled vines winding their way through the small, broken fountain. A woman stands in the center of it, her face tilted up toward the sky as if she's waiting for something, perhaps a sign, perhaps just the promise that the world will keep turning. It's strange, isn't it? How, in the midst of all this desolation, people still hold on to small pockets of beauty. For the survivors of the Black Death, that beauty became something to clutch tightly, a way to remind themselves that life, in some form, still existed. You wonder if she's part of the dwindling population that still tries to maintain some semblance of normalcy. It's difficult, after all, when you've seen so much death, when the streets are filled with the reminders of what was lost. But life, however fragile, continues to persist in the most unexpected ways. A stray dog runs past, wagging its tail, clearly unbothered by the surrounding chaos. You can almost hear it thinking, I'm just here for the scraps, mate. The woman in the garden, meanwhile, continues her ritual, which, you suspect, has been part of her daily routine, long before the plague. Perhaps she's cultivating the garden to trade what little produce she can grow. Maybe for grain, or for another chance at survival. Or perhaps it's simply a way to cope with the overwhelming loneliness, the endless days of waking up and wondering what's left to look forward to. She's probably doing it because it's the only thing that feels normal, the only thing that helps her forget, even for a moment, how different the world has become. Historians still debate whether these small acts of resistance were widespread or if they were unique to certain groups. Some scholars claim that the rise of survival economies led to a burst of creativity among those who remained. Gardens sprouted everywhere, as did small, independent trades, giving rise to a new kind of barter system. Others argue that, despite these efforts, most people were simply too overwhelmed by the weight of grief to engage with anything outside of sheer survival. You move on, leaving the garden behind, but the image of it lingers. The contrast between the overgrown vines and the desolate streets speaks to the complex reality of life after the Black Death. People were both clinging to life and drifting from it, trying to rebuild what they could, but knowing deep down that the world they knew was gone. Now, when you walk in town, it's like there, it has some kind of new face of authority. The further you walk, the more the town seems to shift in character, like it's trying to shake off its past. You notice the subtle changes. The empty homes now replaced by buildings that look hastily constructed, a mixture of makeshift shelters and crumbling stone. There's a rawness to the architecture now, as though the town, much like its people, is still in a process of putting itself back together. You pass by a small square where a handful of people have gathered, their faces drawn tight with exhaustion. You can hear snippets of conversation, but the words float on the air, almost as if they're afraid to make too much noise. Among the people gathered, you spot a man in a dark cloak, his face shadowed by the hood. He stands a little apart from the others, his posture one of authority, though it's hard to tell how he got that authority. There are no formal titles here, no well-established governments, just survivors. He watches the others with a keen eye, not out of interest, but out of necessity. The plague didn't just wipe out the population, it shattered the societal structures that had once been firmly in place. Lords, priests, merchants, all those who had held power before are gone or scattered. What remains is a society that's scrambling to find a new way to organize itself, a way to move forward. And in this scramble, it seems that even the smallest bit of authority is a valuable commodity. You can't help but wonder, what does authority mean in a world like this? Who holds the power now? The answer, you realize, is no longer as simple as it once was. Before the plague, the leaders of towns and cities were clear. Lords, kings, bishops, figures who stood at the top of the social hierarchy, who made the rules and enforced them. Now, the survivors have to make do with what's left, scraps of influence, fragments of old systems, and a whole lot of improvisation. Historians still debate whether the post-plague period saw a rise in local authority, or if it simply led to the breakdown of governance altogether. Some argue that the chaos led to a decentralization of power, with communities becoming more self-reliant. Others suggest that in the absence of a strong central power, a vacuum was created which allowed for exploitation by the few who could seize control. As you continue your walk, the cloaked figure fades into the crowd. His presence feels like a reminder that power isn't always what it seems. Sometimes, it's simply about showing up and being the one who's willing to take charge when no one else can, or is willing to. It's not said, but you feel the forgotten souls that once were. You turn a corner, the quiet streets now opening up to a larger square, one that was once filled with life. You can imagine it. Children playing, merchants shouting their wares, the clink of coins, the hum of conversation. But now, it's still. The square is empty, save for a few remnants of the past. An overturned cart, a stray dog sniffing the ground, an old woman sitting on a nearby bench, her eyes distant, gazing at nothing in particular. It's impossible not to notice how everything feels hollow now, as if the heart of the town has been ripped out and nothing has yet been able to replace it. The buildings are still standing, the roads still exist, but the people who once filled this space are gone, their lives interrupted by something that none of them could have predicted. As you move closer to the woman on the bench, you see that her hands are folded neatly in her lap, but her fingers tremble slightly. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but it's there, a sign of the deep, abiding anxiety that has taken hold of so many who lived through the Black Death. She's a survivor, just like you, though she wears her survival like a badge of honor, one that she never asked for. You wonder about the other survivors. You've heard stories about them, those who tried to move on, to rebuild their lives, only to find that the world they knew was no longer there. Those who sought refuge in religion, in trade, in whatever they could find that felt familiar. Yet the trauma never quite leaves, does it? It lingers in the way they speak, in the way they walk, in the way they look at the world, always searching for something they've lost. Historians still debate how survivors of the Black Death coped with the psychological toll of such a massive loss. Some argue that the trauma led to a wave of religious fervor as people turned to the church for answers that would never come. Others suggest that the survivors simply had to get used to a new reality, one where death was never far away and where the normal rhythms of life had been irrevocably disrupted. But, of course, no one knows for sure. It's all speculation, isn't it? We can't truly understand what it was like to live through that devastation. All we can do is look at the empty squares, the abandoned homes, the people who are still here but have somehow lost a part of themselves along the way. You stand beside the woman for a moment, watching the way the light hits her face, the lines of her skin telling stories of years lived in the shadow of death. You wonder how much she remembers of the time before, how much of it she wishes she could forget. But then, just as quietly as she had appeared, she stands, her hands shaking ever so slightly as she walks away, fading into the streets like so many others. The changing face of religion. You continue on, the streets narrowing as you leave the square behind, and your mind starts to wander. You think about religion, how it must have taken on a new shape in the wake of the Black Death. For centuries, the church had been the cornerstone of medieval life, offering guidance, solace, and a sense of control over a world that often felt uncontrollable. But after the plague, that relationship began to shift. You find yourself standing before a church now, its grand doors closed, but its presence is undeniable. Even after everything, it still looms over the town like a silent sentinel. The air around it feels heavy, almost oppressive, like the weight of centuries of faith is pressing down on you. You can almost hear the echoes of sermons that once filled this space, of priests standing at the altar, speaking of salvation, of the promise of eternal life. You imagine the people who gathered here, desperately seeking answers, hoping that faith could somehow protect them from the invisible death that swept across the land. But now, those same sermons sound hollow. What good was salvation when the world felt so fragile? Inside the church, you see remnants of what was once a vibrant community. Candles still burn, but their light is dim, like a flicker that doesn't quite know whether it should keep going. The pews are empty, the air still and heavy. Some survivors still come here, though not in the numbers they once did. They kneel in prayer, but the prayers seem to hang in the air, unanswered, as if the heavens themselves have grown silent. Historians still debate the role of religion in the aftermath of the plague. Some suggest that the church's authority was severely shaken, that the Black Death led to widespread questioning of faith and the clergy. Others argue that, in the face of such devastation, people clung more tightly to their faith, seeking comfort and protection from an unseen force. Either way, it's clear that something changed after the plague, whether it was a loss of trust in the institution or simply a redefinition of what it meant to believe. The church's role in daily life was no longer as unquestioned as it once had been. You leave the church behind, the weight of it still lingering in the back of your mind. It's a reminder of the spiritual struggle that many survivors faced, the effort to reconcile the horrors they'd witnessed with the faith they'd once held so dearly. And yet, Even in the face of such uncertainty, there's something enduring about the human need to seek meaning, to find some thread of hope in the darkness. The world may have changed, but the quest for answers, for comfort, for something to believe in, remains just as it always has. You find yourself walking through a part of the town that looks less lived in, less cared for. The homes here are smaller, the roofs crooked, the foundations giving way to the passage of time. There's a certain decay to the air, as though the land itself has begun to wither, along with the people who once tended it. The ground beneath your feet feels uneven, and you can almost sense the history in the earth, the many lives that have come and gone, the people who once worked these fields, tilled the soil, and lived off of what the land could provide. After the plague, it seems the relationship between people and land shifted. Land was no longer just a commodity. It became a symbol of survival. Those who had it could sell it, rent it, or simply hold on to it, waiting for the world to recover. But many didn't have the luxury of ownership. The survivors found themselves in a bitter struggle over the land that had once been so plentiful and generous. It wasn't just about farming anymore. It was about control, about a scarce resource that people fought to keep or acquire. You walk past a field now, empty and overgrown, where crops once grew in neat rows. There's a small sign at the entrance, probably put there by some enterprising survivor, trying to stake a claim. The earth is hard, cracked in places, as if it's been neglected too long. But even in its state of abandonment, there's still something raw and beautiful about it. You can't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the people who tried to rebuild here, who tried to make a living off of land that had been so unforgiving in the wake of the plague. Historians still debate how the Black Death affected the redistribution of land. Some argue that the plague created a shift in power, as the scarcity of labor led to higher wages and the potential for peasants to buy or lease land from their former masters. Others suggest that the landowners simply took advantage of the situation, using their position of power to maintain control. Either way, the survivors had to learn a new relationship with the earth, one that was less about abundance and more about survival. You can't help but wonder how many people walked past this field, wondering if it would ever yield anything again. How many survivors looked at the land and saw nothing but a reminder of their loss. As you continue walking, the wind picks up again, rustling the dry grasses and sending a chill through your bones. The world feels colder here, less forgiving, as though the land itself is holding a grudge against those who have survived it. This also made a huge shifting role of women. There was no other choice. As you're walking now toward a row of houses, each one more cramped than the last, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and cooking fires. The sounds of life seem faint here, muffled by the close proximity of the buildings, the narrow streets, the way the town feels like it's almost been swallowed by the earth. The survivors of the Black Death, those who managed to hold on to something, became experts at making do. It was a time when people had to adapt quickly, and adapt they did, each person figuring out their own way of getting by. But it's the women you notice the most. As you walk, you can't help but wonder how their roles have changed in the aftermath. Before the plague, their lives were largely defined by the roles they were assigned: mothers, wives, caretakers. But now, with so much of the population gone, the traditional boundaries of gender have begun to shift. Women, like the men, had to step into roles that they may never have imagined for themselves. whether it was taking on the responsibilities of farming, of running businesses, or of becoming the new heads of households. You pass a small shop, its sign barely hanging on the door. The woman inside is busy behind the counter, working with a precision that suggests she's done this many times before. You wonder, though, how she's holding up. In a world where so many have fallen, where death has claimed so much, she has persevered. She's still here, still standing, and still working. Historians still debate how the roles of women changed after the Black Death. Some argue that the absence of so many men allowed women to take on more visible roles in the community, running businesses, managing estates, and even assuming political power in some cases. Others suggest that while women did step into these new roles, they were still held back by the social norms of the time, limited in their ability to truly seize the opportunities that presented themselves. You think about this woman behind the counter. She's likely not just running the shop for herself, but for a family, for a community. Her survival, her ability to hold things together, is a testament to the resilience of women during this time. You wonder if she sees herself as a hero, or if, like so many survivors, she's simply doing what needs to be done, one day at a time. As you leave the shop behind, the wind picks up again, a little stronger this time. The air feels heavier, as though the world itself is waiting for something. And maybe it is. Maybe it's waiting for the survivors to rise up, to take what's left and turn it into something new. Or maybe it's simply waiting for them to rest, to stop fighting for a moment and just let the world breathe again. You keep walking, feeling the weight of history on your shoulders and wondering just how much more there is to learn. It was also the silence of the fields, as the road curves gently as you move toward the outskirts of town, and the houses thin out, replaced by barren stretches of land. The fields here seem to stretch on forever, their once pristine rows of crops now overrun with weeds and brambles, as if nature itself had decided to reclaim what was lost. The air is heavy with the smell of the earth, damp, rich, and a little musty, like the remnants of something that used to be. You walk for a while, your footsteps muted by the tall grass, and for a brief moment you imagine that the world could be anything again, anything at all, if only the land would allow it. As you walk, you notice the occasional stone boundary marker half sunken into the ground, its inscriptions worn away by centuries of weather and use. These markers once divided the land into estates and territories, places where life had flourished in a delicate balance between man and nature. But now they stand as silent sentinels, reminders of a time when people had ownership over the earth, when they could depend on the land to provide. The Black Death didn't just take the people, it took the promise of the land too. The survivors who remained faced a new reality, one in which the balance between man and nature was no longer so predictable. Field that had once been bountiful now lay fallow, and the struggle to make a living off of the land became a much harder fight. The question was no longer how to cultivate the land, but whether the land could still be cultivated at all. The fields seemed to echo that question, stretching out in front of you like an open wound, raw and untended. It's not just the land that has been devastated by the plague, it's the very rhythm of life that has been interrupted. Farming, once a predictable and even comforting cycle, has become a gamble. No one can say for sure whether the crops will grow again, whether the seasons will return as they once did, bringing harvests to feed the survivors. There's a faint, lingering hope that maybe, just maybe, the earth will forgive them for what it has lost. Historians still debate how agricultural practices changed in the wake of the Black Death. Some argue that a sharp decline in the population led to fewer mouths to feed, and thus some land went unused. Others suggest that the absence of skilled laborers caused a complete breakdown in agricultural practices. Whatever the case, it's clear that the survivors were left with a difficult choice: try to rebuild a system that had already failed, or adapt to the harsh new realities of survival. You stand for a moment in the middle of the field, looking out over the endless expanse. The stillness is almost unbearable, as if the land itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to change. You can't help but wonder, is this the beginning of something new, or the slow decay of something that once was? It was the unspoken bonds of the dead, as the night is fully upon you now. The sky a deep indigo, the stars scattered above like distant whispers. The town seems to have fallen into a kind of peaceful slumber, but you know better. The town may be still, but the ghosts of the past linger in the corners, in the spaces between the buildings, in the quiet places where memories still hold sway. You can't see them, not in the physical sense, but you feel their presence all the same. You walk down a narrow path, one that winds between old stone walls, past forgotten corners where weeds have taken root. There's a small cemetery here, tucked away from the rest of the town. The gravestones are simple, worn with time, many of them cracked or tilted, their inscriptions faded by the years. You can't help but stop, drawn to the quiet solemnity of the place. The Black Death claimed so many lives, and in its wake there was an overwhelming need to bury the dead quickly, to make room for the next in line. There was no time for elaborate ceremonies, no time for proper farewells. People were buried in mass graves, sometimes without even their names. The dead became statistics, numbers to be dealt with, removed from the living world. But in this small cemetery, the forgotten dead seemed to rest together in a kind of silent solidarity. The weight of their loss isn't marked by grand monuments, but by the quiet space they occupy. You wonder what these people would think if they could see the world now, the survivors, the ones who lived on after the plague passed. Would they feel like they've been forgotten, or would they understand that their sacrifice was part of something bigger, something that led to the survival of the world they once knew? Historians still debate the fate of the Black Death's victims. Some argue that the sheer scale of the death toll led to a breakdown in proper burial practices, leaving many of the dead unmarked and their stories untold. Others suggest that, despite the overwhelming loss, the survivors found ways to honor the dead, to preserve their memory in small, subtle ways, like this cemetery, tucked away from view. As you stand in front of the graveyard, the wind picks up once more, the cold air brushing against your face. You wonder if the dead still watch over this place, if they still care for the survivors who continue to walk the earth. Maybe they do, in their own way. Maybe their bonds aren't so easily broken. You turn away from the cemetery, the stillness of the place lingering in your mind. The town is quiet again, but in the distance, you can hear the faint sound of life continuing, of work being done, of people finding their way in the world. The dead may be gone, but the survivors remain, and so the cycle continues. It has been the unexpected rise of the artisan, as the sound of hammering drifts to you on the wind as you make your way back into the heart of town. It's not the frantic clanging you might expect, but a steady, rhythmic tapping, the kind of sound that brings a strange sense of calm. As you follow the noise, you turn the corner and find yourself standing in front of a small workshop. The wooden door is cracked open, And through the gap, you can see the silhouette of a figure bent over a workbench, busy with their craft. You step closer, curious, and catch a glimpse of the worker, an older man, his hair graying at the temples, his face lined with the wear of years spent at the forge. He's shaping a piece of metal with quiet precision, hammering it into a shape that is still unclear to you. The workshop is small, crammed with tools, half-finished pieces of metalwork, and the faint smell of oil and sweat. It's a humble place, but it's clear that this man has mastered his craft. There's a peace in the way he works, as though every tap of the hammer is a small act of defiance against the chaos of the world. Artisans, like this man, have always held a special place in society, but after the plague, they became something more. With so many people gone and traditional trades in disarray, the survivors turned to the skilled few who remained: blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, and masons. To fill the gaps left by the death toll, these artisans became the backbone of the new society, working to create the tools, the homes, the very fabric of life that the plague had torn apart. You wonder about this man's story. Was he always a blacksmith? Did he inherit the trade from his father, or was it something he picked up out of necessity when the world around him fell apart? Perhaps he's had to teach himself, like so many others, how to survive in a world that no longer follows the rules. You watch as he carefully bends the metal, his focus unbroken, and you realize something. Artisans, like him, have a quiet power. They take what's broken, what's been discarded, and turn it into something new, something that can be used, something that can make the world function again. In a way, they are the quiet architects of survival, crafting the foundations of the future with their hands. Historians still debate how quickly artisan trades became essential after the plague. Some suggest that with fewer people to fill labor-intensive roles, skilled craftspeople quickly became indispensable, while others argue that the rise of the artisan was just a temporary fix, a stopgap in the larger process of rebuilding. Either way, the importance of these trades was undeniable. They were a necessary part of the survival and rebuilding process. You linger for a while, watching the blacksmith work. It's hard to say how much longer the town will be able to survive, or how long this man will continue his craft. But for now, in this moment, he is creating something that will endure. A simple act, a small piece of metal turned into something of value. It's not much, but for the survivors, it's enough. For now. It was the rise of new social bonds. As you continue your walk, the town feels both familiar and foreign at the same time. You pass by a narrow alleyway where two women stand huddled in conversation, speaking in hushed tones, their voices barely above a whisper. They glance around nervously, as if making sure no one is listening, yet there's an unmistakable sense of camaraderie between them. Their shared secrecy doesn't seem to come from fear of outsiders, but rather a shared understanding of the world around them, one where old alliances and networks of trust have either vanished or been shattered by the plague. After the Black Death, everything that once defined social relationships was thrown into disarray. Families, once tightly knit, were torn apart. Neighborly bonds weakened as death took its toll on entire communities, leaving survivors to sift through the wreckage and rebuild what they could. Yet, amidst the chaos and loss, something unexpected began to emerge. New social bonds formed. In the absence of the old structures, people sought connection in unexpected places. Those who had survived became more dependent on one another than ever before. A shared understanding of grief, loss, and survival fostered new, deeper relationships built not on bloodlines or inherited status, but on shared experience. The women you pass by are likely part of this new social fabric, a network of survivors banding together for mutual support. Perhaps they're trading information, offering help, or simply providing each other with a kind of companionship that has become all too rare in a world that seems to have forgotten the meaning of community. Historians still debate the exact nature of these new social bonds. Some suggest that survivors became more insular, that the collapse of old communities left people to rely solely on their immediate families or neighbors. Others argue that in the absence of traditional power structures, new forms of cooperation, like guilds, religious communes, or even informal networks, began to rise. Whether these bonds were based on mutual survival, religious faith, or the need for shared resources, one thing is clear. In a world where everything was uncertain, people had to find a way to get by together. As you walk further down the alley, the women's conversation fades into the distance, but the feeling of connection lingers in the air. Maybe it's the soft warmth in their voices, or the way they lean in close to each other, sharing the burden of the world's weight. It's a subtle reminder that even in the most uncertain of times, people can find ways to connect, to survive, and to rebuild. A world without children. You leave the alleyway behind, stepping into a quieter part of the town. The houses here are smaller, more humble, with gardens that are barely maintained, the overgrown hedges looking as if they've been neglected for years. There's an eerie silence to the place, as though the life has been drained out of it. You pause for a moment and look around, and that's when you notice it. The absence of children. It's a strange thing, really. In a world where the average life expectancy was much shorter, children were everywhere before the plague. They ran through the streets, played in the town squares, and were a constant source of noise and chaos. But now, the streets are empty. You can't remember the last time you heard the sounds of laughter or the patter of little feet. There are no children playing in the fields, no groups of young ones running to fetch water, no playful scuffles in the market. The silence is unnerving. It's a stark reminder of the death toll. The young, the old, the healthy, the sick. The plague didn't discriminate. Entire families were wiped out, and with them, the next generation. For the survivors, the future must have seemed uncertain. How could you even begin to imagine a future without the promise of children to carry on the legacy of your town, your people, your way of life? You pass by a small house, its window cracked open just enough to let a breeze in, and for a moment, you think you hear something, a distant cry, faint but unmistakable. Your heart skips a beat, but when you look closer, it's just the wind, tugging at the shutters, pulling the sound of the empty house out into the street. A childless house, abandoned like so many others. No future waiting there. Historians still debate the long-term impact the Black Death had on population growth in Europe. Some argue that the demographic shift caused by the plague led to a generation or more of stunted growth, as the death of so many young people left few to replace them. Others claim that the labor shortage created by the mass deaths resulted in an economic revival for the survivors. As land became more abundant, wages rose, and fewer people competed for resources. Either way, one thing remained certain: the loss of children. The next generation was a wound that the world would struggle to heal for centuries. You walk on, The silence of the streets hanging heavy in the air. It's an unnatural quiet, one that feels as though it's settled deep into the bones of the town. There are no children to break the stillness, no cries of laughter to chase away the dark thoughts creeping into your mind. You wonder, as you keep moving through the town, what kind of future the survivors imagined for themselves. Could they ever truly move forward without the sound of young voices filling the air? Would this strange silence be the soundtrack of their world for years to come? The burden of memory. The town is growing darker now, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows over the streets. The air feels colder, too, as if the world is shifting from a time of grief into something else. A long, drawn-out process of coming to terms with what has been lost. It's easy to forget, in moments like these, that the survivors are still here. They've endured, but they carry the weight of the past with them. Memories of the lives that were once lived here, of the families and friends they've buried, of the moments they'll never get back. You pause for a moment, looking out at the town square once more. There's no one here now, but you can imagine it. The bustling crowds, the laughter, the chatter, the markets filled with goods, the noise of trade, the familiarity of daily life. You wonder how long it will take before the survivors forget those sounds, before the memories fade into something distant, something unreal. Will they carry them forever? Or will time eventually dull the pain, like a river smoothing out jagged stones? It's a strange thing. Memory. You can't help but feel the weight of it as you stand there, in the midst of a town that seems to be both fading and holding on at the same time. The survivors may have lost so much, but they've also held on to something intangible, something that can't be erased by time or grief. And maybe, in the end, that's all anyone can ask for. Historians still debate whether the survivors of the Black Death truly recovered, or if they carried the burden of their memories for generations to come. Some argue that the trauma was too great, that the psychological toll of such a devastating loss could never be fully overcome. Others suggest that, like the land, people slowly found ways to rebuild, to move on, to forget. But no matter what the historians say, one thing is certain: the memories of the past would remain a quiet presence in the background of every survivor's life. You turn away from the square, the weight of the memories hanging heavy in the air. There's nothing more to see here, nothing more to understand, just the slow march of time and the survivors who continue to walk it. The long night of the soul. The streets have grown quieter as you continue your journey, the once bright daylight fading into twilight. The sky, tinged with soft shades of orange and purple, casts long, faint shadows across the buildings. The town, which had once felt so alive, now seems to be holding its breath, waiting for something you can't quite name. You pass by a few more houses, their windows dim and shuttered, and you can't help but feel the heaviness of it all. The stillness, the loss, the lives once so full of light and noise, now reduced to little more than memories. As you wander, you come across a group of survivors sitting outside a small house. They don't speak, but their eyes meet in understanding. The group consists of men and women, all staring out into the distance, perhaps lost in their own thoughts, perhaps simply worn down by the overwhelming weight of the world. Their faces are lined with exhaustion, with a fatigue that's impossible to erase. Their clothes are simple, worn from overuse, their hands restless, as if they don't know what to do with themselves anymore. A faint, low hum fills the air, a soft chant of words. the murmur of something familiar, something old. It's the sound of prayer, but it's not the formal, well-practiced recitations of the clergy you might expect. Instead, it's something raw, something personal, words muttered under breath by those who no longer know what to ask for, who are tired of asking, but continue anyway. The Black Death didn't just take away loved ones. It took away something deeper, something that's harder to describe. It stripped the survivors of a sense of security, a sense of order, and left them with nothing but questions. In a time when nothing felt certain, when the world seemed to have come apart at the seams, the survivors turned inward, seeking solace in whatever comfort they could find. For some, that meant turning to religion, but for others, it was more complicated than that. Faith, for many, had been shattered by the brutality of the plague. How could you still believe in something that had allowed so much suffering? Historians still debate the impact the Black Death had on religious beliefs. Some suggest that the plague led to an increase in religious fervor as people desperately sought answers in a world that made no sense. Others argue that the sheer scale of the suffering caused many to question their faith, to turn away from the church in favor of more personal, introspective spiritual practices. Either way, the psychological toll on the survivors was undeniable. They were left to rebuild not just their homes, but their sense of self, their place in the world. The group of survivors doesn't seem to notice you standing there. They continue to sit in silence, a quiet meditation, a moment of collective reflection. It's a strange comfort, watching them even though their sadness feels like a heavy blanket over the town. Perhaps this is all that remains now: prayer, reflection, and the slow march of time. You leave them behind and walk into the twilight, the quiet hum of the prayer still lingering in your ears. The long night is beginning to fall, and with it comes a strange peace, a peace born not from the absence of grief, but from the acceptance of it. You wonder, as you walk, if the survivors ever find solace in the darkness, or if the weight of the world will always feel this heavy. There was a shift in the changing nature of work as the last light of day fades as you walk further through the town, passing by more houses that stand as silent witnesses to a world that once was. The streets have grown colder, and the air feels sharp, biting at your skin. But as you move deeper into the heart of the town, you hear the faint sound of hammering once again. It's distant but steady, rhythmic, a familiar and grounding noise in a world that has become so unpredictable. You follow the sound, your feet moving almost on instinct, and soon you come to another small workshop, its windows dimly lit from within. Inside, you see a man working diligently, his hands moving with a practiced fluidity as he bends metal. The shop is small, but it's filled with the tools of his trade: anvils, hammers, and an assortment of half-finished projects scattered across the space. He doesn't look up as you enter, lost in his work, his brow furrowed in concentration. The man is a blacksmith, one of the few trades that has continued, perhaps even thrived, in the aftermath of the plague. When the world was turned upside down, when much of the old order had collapsed, it was the practical hands-on skills that became invaluable. The blacksmith, the carpenter, the weaver, they were the ones who helped to stitch the broken world back together in a time when many people were lost, uncertain of how to move forward. Those with the skills to rebuild the physical world had a new kind of power. It's easy to overlook the importance of these trades in the grand sweep of history. After all, when we look back on the medieval period, we often focus on kings, wars and revolutions, but in the aftermath of the Black Death, it was the quiet, everyday workers, the blacksmiths, the builders, the weavers, who kept society from completely crumbling. Without them, nothing would have been able to function. They provided the essentials, the tools needed for survival. Historians still debate how long it took for economies to stabilize after the Black Death. Some argue that the shift from feudalism to more modern forms of labor and trade was accelerated by the plague, while others suggest that it took several generations for society to truly rebuild. But one thing is certain: those who could work with their hands were the lifeblood of the new world, and in their steady, quiet labor, they began to restore what had been lost. You watch the blacksmith for a moment longer, marveling at his focus, his ability to block out everything else as he works. The soft clang of metal against metal is almost soothing, a rhythmic sound that anchors you in this moment. The world may have shifted around him, but he has found his place in it. Perhaps that's all anyone can do now: find their place in the new world, however small it may be, and keep working, one piece at a time. You step back into the street, the warmth of the workshop still lingering on your skin. The night is settling in now, the town growing quiet once again, but in the distance, you can still hear the steady rhythm of work, a reminder that no matter how much the world changes, life continues, one task at a time. It was the unspoken bonds of the dead, as the night is fully upon you now. The sky, a deep indigo, the stars scattered above like distant whispers. The town seems to have fallen into a kind of peaceful slumber, but you know better. The town may be still, but the ghosts of the past linger in the corners, in the spaces between the buildings, in the quiet places where memories still hold sway. You can't see them, not in the physical sense, but you feel their presence all the same. You walk down a narrow path, one that winds between old stone walls, past forgotten corners where weeds have taken root. There's a small cemetery here, tucked away from the rest of the town. The gravestones are simple, worn with time, many of them cracked or tilted, their inscriptions faded by the years. You can't help but stop, drawn to the quiet solemnity of the place. The Black Death claimed so many lives, and in its wake there was an overwhelming need to bury the dead quickly, to make room for the next in line. There was no time for elaborate ceremonies, no time for proper farewells. People were buried in mass graves, sometimes without even their names. The dead became statistics, numbers to be dealt with, removed from the living world. But in this small cemetery, the forgotten dead seemed to rest together in a kind of silent solidarity. The weight of their loss isn't marked by grand monuments, but by the quiet space they occupy. You wonder what these people would think if they could see the world now, the survivors, the ones who lived on after the plague passed. Would they feel like they've been forgotten, or would they understand that their sacrifice was part of something bigger, something that led to the survival of the world they once knew? Historians still debate the fate of the Black Death's victims. Some argue that the sheer scale of the death toll led to a breakdown in proper burial practices, leaving many of the dead unmarked and their stories untold. Others suggest that, despite the overwhelming loss, the survivors found ways to honor the dead, to preserve their memory in small, subtle ways, like this cemetery, tucked away from view. As you stand in front of the graveyard, the wind picks up once more, the cold air brushing against your face. You wonder if the dead still watch over this place, if they still care for the survivors who continue to walk the earth. Maybe they do, in their own way. Maybe their bonds aren't so easily broken. You turn away from the cemetery, the stillness of the place lingering in your mind. The town is quiet again, but in the distance, you can hear the faint sound of life continuing, of work being done, of people finding their way in the world. The dead may be gone, but the survivors remain, and so the cycle continues. There was a fragility of hope clinging on as the night has fully settled, the dark sky now covered in a blanket of stars that seem almost out of place in this world of struggle. As you walk further through the town, the houses seem to blur together in the low light, their outlines soft and indistinct against the backdrop of the vast, silent landscape. It's a different kind of quiet now, one that comes after years of chaos, of loss, of rebuilding. It's a quiet that feels like the town is holding its breath, waiting, or perhaps simply resigned to the way things have become. Time seems to stretch here, slow and fluid, allowing you to notice the little things. A child's laughter drifting from a courtyard, the glint of sunlight catching on a wooden bucket, the tender care with which a farmer tends his field, patching the earth and coaxing new growth from soil that remembers both sorrow and survival. The people you pass do not hurry, their movements measured and deliberate, as if every step is a quiet act of remembrance and resilience. And as you pause for a moment, leaning into the soft hush of the evening, the stories of struggle, loss, and quiet courage settle gently into the spaces around you, not as burdens, but as a reminder that even in the aftermath of darkness, life finds ways to bloom, to endure, and to carry forward with a patient, unassuming grace. You breathe in the calm, exhale the weight of the past, and let the gentle rhythm of the medieval world lull you toward rest, allowing your mind and body to drift softly, serenely, into the embrace of the night, where history and imagination meet in a quiet, timeless peace. You come across a small gathering of survivors sitting around a fire, their faces half lit by the flickering flames. The warmth from the fire reaches you, a welcome relief from the cold that has begun to settle into your bones. The group is huddled together, not speaking much, but you can feel the unspoken connection between them. It's not the kind of bond that comes from years of friendship or shared joy. It's a bond born of survival, of shared hardship, of the quiet understanding that no one can make it through this alone. One of the women sitting closest to the fire stirs the pot hanging above the flames. The smell of something simple, something nourishing, drifts through the air. It's nothing extravagant, but it's enough. It's what they have, what they can manage, and in this world, sometimes that's all you can ask for. You watch them for a moment, the way they pass the time, the way they exist in the stillness, and you can't help but feel a strange sense of comfort. Here, in this moment, there is something fragile but enduring about them. They've lost so much, but they continue to hold on to what they can. Community, warmth, the small things that make life worth living. It's as in the face of everything that's been lost, they've chosen to continue on, not because they expect things to get better, but because, in their own quiet way, they still believe in the possibility of something more. Hope, you realize, isn't the grand sweeping thing people often imagine. It's not the big, dramatic moments that we think of when we dream of a brighter future. It's not the promises of kingdoms restored or fortunes rebuilt. It's much smaller, much quieter. It's in the way they continue to gather, to sit together, to share their meager rations, and to listen to the crackle of the fire as they wait out the long night. Historians still debate the nature of hope in post-plague societies. Some suggest that the survivors clung to the idea of rebuilding, that they believed in the possibility of a better tomorrow, even if they couldn't see it. Others argue that the trauma of the plague left hope in tatters, that the survivors were simply going through the motions, unable to truly believe in a future worth striving for. Either way, it's clear that hope, in whatever form it took, played a significant role in the survival of the people who lived through it. It may not have been a loud, triumphant thing, but it was there in the quiet moments, in the little acts of survival. As you stand there watching them, the fire crackling softly, you realize that hope, in its most fragile form, is still alive. It may not be much, but it's enough to keep them going. And perhaps that's all anyone can really ask for. Slowly but surely, there was a quiet rebirth. We head into the night that deepens further, and the world around you seems to fade into shadow. The fire that flickered so brightly moments ago now burns low, its embers casting a soft glow that illuminates the faces of the survivors around you. The town, once so full of life and energy, is now still, almost ghostly. But in this moment, as the fire burns out and the world quiets around you, there's a sense of peace. It's not a peace that comes from resolution or from any clear understanding of the future. It's a peace that comes from simply being, from surviving another day in a world that's no longer the same. You sit down by the fire, close enough to feel its warmth, but far enough to give the group their space. The wind has picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of the earth and the faint, familiar odor of wood smoke. You listen to the sounds of the night, crickets in the distance, the rustling of leaves, the quiet murmur of the group as they talk in low tones. There's a kind of rhythm to the night now, a slow, steady beat that is both comforting and melancholy. The survivors around you don't have answers. They don't have grand plans for the future. They're not rebuilding empires or reclaiming lost glory. They're simply surviving, and somehow that feels like enough. Perhaps that's the lesson they've learned, the lesson that time and hardship have taught them. Survival isn't just about fighting for a better future. It's about living through the present, about holding on to the small things that make life worth living in the moment. You look up at the sky, the stars now scattered above you like tiny fragments of a distant past. The world is vast, and yet here, in this small corner of it, life continues. Not in the way it once did, not in the way they had imagined it before the plague, but in a quieter, slower, more humble way. They have survived. They continue to survive. And in this quiet rebirth, perhaps there is hope, not for the return of what was, but for the acceptance of what is. As you sit there, the fire finally sputtering out, you feel the weight of the past settle into the earth beneath you. You've walked through the town, through the memories, through the silence, and now, as the last embers fade away, you realize that this is the new world. The survivors have carved out their place in it, fragile though it may be, and they continue to walk forward, step by step, in the long night that stretches ahead. It's a journey, one that may never truly end. But for now, for this moment, it's enough. They are alive, and in that simple truth, there is a kind of quiet victory. The world may never be the same, but it is still here. And so, in the quiet, among the ashes and the shadows, a new chapter begins, one that will be written in silence, in small acts of survival, and in the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, tomorrow will be a little brighter than today. And as the wind rustles through the trees and the last traces of the fire disappear into the night, you settle into the stillness content for now, knowing that this story, though incomplete, is far from over. As the sun dips slowly behind the thatched roofs and the distant hills are softened by the hazy glow of evening, you find yourself walking again along those quiet medieval streets where the echoes of a world once shaken by loss have softened into the hum of daily life. The markets, though smaller and calmer than before, now carry the faint, comforting sense of freshly baked bread, drying herbs, and the occasional hint of smoke from a warm hearth, reminding you that life, in its stubborn persistence, continues even after unimaginable hardship. You hear the gentle clip-clop of horses along uneven cobblestones, the soft murmur of neighbors exchanging greetings, and the occasional rustle of wind through the leaves of a tree that has somehow endured decades of change.